In a little town, there was a bathhouse where old and infirm people went to have baths and massage. And there was a young girl attendant there whom all these old people loved because she was so kind and helpful to them. Well, one day, so many old people came to the bathhouse that it was late at night before the girl had finished her work and could think of going home. And as she was tidying up and putting away the brushes and the sponges and the towels, she heard in the street outside the bathhouse a rattling of wheels and a jingling of harness and a clatter of hooves over the cobbles. She ran to open the door. What did she see? A magnificent golden coach drawn by 4 black stallions with gold and silver harness and bells on their forehead straps that rang out gaily as they tossed their plume-decked heads. Surely, thought the girl, this must be the wedding coach of some rich lord. But stepping out of the coach, what did she see? A hideous little goblin man with glaring eyes and bandy legs, and after him stepped out 3 younger goblins, even more ugly, and after the 3 younger goblins stepped out an old woman goblin, hideous and evil. The girl quickly made the sign of the cross over the threshold, ran back into the bathhouse, and slammed the door. "Go away, go away, go away," she whispered under her breath. But the goblins didn't go away, although they couldn't come over the threshold because of the sign of the cross the girl had made. So the hideous little goblin man called out, "Come out here to me, my little daughter. Your bridegroom awaits you. I have chosen you as wife for one of my sons." The girl was very frightened, but she kept her wits about her, and she called back, "I am not ready to be married. I have neither clothes nor shoes." Then the goblin man called again and said, "Only tell me what clothes you need, my little daughter, and you shall have everything your heart desires." And as the girl stood thinking what next she should say, a little mouse crept up to her and whispered, "Listen, listen, don't be in a hurry. Tell the goblin what clothes you need, but tell him slowly, a garment at a time, for the dawn will come, but not yet." So the girl called out, "First of all, I need a silk chemise." Then the old woman goblin said to the 3 young goblins, "My grandchildren, which of you can go the quickest there and back again?" And the eldest of the 3 young goblins said, "I can go as swiftly as a wave." And the second said, "I can go as swiftly as the wind that drives the wave." And the youngest said, "But I can go as swiftly as a thought. I am here, I am there, I am back again, all at the same time." "Leap then, little grandson," said the old woman goblin. "Leap, leap, leap. Your feet are your fortune. It is you who will win a lovely bride." The youngest goblin leapt and vanished. He was here, he was there, he was back again, holding in his claws of hands a silk chemise. The old woman goblin threw the silk chemise in through the window of the bathhouse. "Here is your silk chemise, little daughter. Put it on and let us go, for the wedding bells are ringing under the earth, and the wedding guests are gathered together." "Take your time, take your time. The dawn is yet far off," whispered the little mouse, and the girl put on the silk chemise slowly. Oh, so slowly. "Is the silk chemise to your liking, little daughter?" called the old woman goblin. "Yes, it is to my liking," said the girl. "But I am not yet ready. I have no golden gown." "Go you quick as thought," said the old woman goblin to the youngest of her grandchildren. "Leap, leap, leap, be here, be there, be back again, and bring the bride a golden gown." youngest goblin leapt and vanished. Then, in the winking of an eye, he was back again, carrying in his claws of hands a golden gown. The old woman goblin tossed the golden gown in through the window of the bathhouse, and the little mouse whispered to the girl, "Loiter, loiter, the dawn is not yet." The girl put on the golden gown, slowly, oh, so slowly, and the goblin grandmother called from outside the house, "Is the golden gown to your liking, little daughter?" "Yes, it is to my liking," said the girl. "Then come out, little daughter," called the goblin grandmother, "for under the earth the wedding feast is spread." But the girl answered, "I am not yet ready. I lack an embroidered girdle." "Leap, quick as thought," said the goblin grandmother. "Leap, leap, leap, be here, be there, be back again, and bring the bride an embroidered girdle." Quick as thought leapt and vanished. He was here, he was there, he was back again, carrying in his claws of hands an embroidered girdle. The old woman goblin tossed the embroidered girdle in through the window of the bathhouse. "Leisurely, leisurely," whispered the little mouse to the girl. "The moon shines dim over the rooftops, but the morning star is still bright. There is no dawn yet." So the girl put on the embroidered girdle. Slow, oh, so slow. "Is the girdle to your liking, little daughter?" called the goblin grandmother from outside the door. "Yes, it is to my liking," said the girl. "But I am not yet ready. My feet are bare. I lack a pair of silver slippers." "Leap, leap, quick as thought. Leap, leap, leap," said the goblin grandmother. "Be here, be there, be back again. Bring from down below a pair of silver slippers and win for yourself a lovely bride." Quick as thought leapt and vanished. He was here, he was there, he was back again, carrying the silver slippers. The old goblin woman tossed the silver slippers in through the window of the bathhouse. "Linger, linger," whispered the little mouse to the girl. "The dawn comes slowly near." And the girl put on the silver slippers slowly, oh, so slow. "Are the slippers to your liking, little daughter?" "Yes, they are to my liking, but I am not yet ready. I lack a diamond headdress." The old goblin woman sent Quick as Thought to fetch a diamond headdress, and when he brought it, she tossed it in through the window of the bathhouse. Little daughter," she called, "we cannot wait longer. Down under the earth, the wedding candles are burning low, and the wedding guests are muttering and complaining. Is the headdress to your liking?" "Yes, it is to my liking," said the girl. "Then put it on and come out quickly," called the old goblin woman. "You will have to go out now," whispered the little mouse to the girl. "But look in the coach and find fault, for the dawn is at hand." So the girl opened the bathhouse door and stepped out. There she stood on the threshold like a king's daughter, with the gold of her gown and the diamonds of her headdress gleaming and glittering. "Step into the coach, little daughter," said the old Goblin man. And he opened the coach door and stretched out a horny hand to help her inside. But the girl drew back. Oh, no, no, the coach is not to my liking. The seats are too hard. Too hard, little daughter, said the old goblin man. Too hard? The cushions are covered with silk and plumply stuffed with goose feathers. I am not used to traveling on feather cushions, said the girl. I must have the coach strewn with hay. The old goblin struck his hands together. What can we do? Down under the earth there is no hay. The girl looked up at the sky. The moon was dropping down below the houses. The morning stars shone over the rooftops. And there in the east, did she see a glimmer of the dawn? No, not yet. I ride on hay, or not at all, she said. The goblins began to scream and chatter. Hay, hay, where could they find hay? The goblin grandmother took out her eyes and flung them up into the air. They whirled around in a circle and came back into her head. I have seen hay, she screamed. In a field outside the big city, over there, I have seen a haystack not yet bound with ropes. Bring hay, quick as thought. Leap, leap, be here, be there, be back again. Bring hay, bring hay. Quick as thought leapt and vanished. He was here, he was there, but he was not back again. The goblin screamed and danced with impatience, and the girl stood by the coach and looked up at the sky. Then a huge bundle of hay came rolling along the street and stopped beside the bathhouse. And from under the bundle crawled Quick as Thought. He was blue in the face and panting, and sweat streamed off him. The other goblins grabbed up the hay in armfuls and began stuffing it into the coach. Hurry, 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 they screamed, tumbling over each other. Dawn is coming. They had the hay in the coach at last. The old goblin man seized the girl by the arm and said, Get in, you hussy, he yelled. The girl put her foot on the step of the coach. She looked down at the ground. There is yet one wisp of hay lying there, she said. You must put that last wisp into the coach, or I do not enter. The 4 black stallions pawed the ground and whinnied. They flung up their heads, and the bells on their forehead straps rang out. The old goblin man snatched up the last wisp of straw and tossed it into the coach. Now get in, he shouted. I get in last, said the girl, as befits a modest maiden. Then all the goblins crowded into the coach. The old goblin man stretched out his hand to help the girl in. The girl glanced back and up at the sky. Yes, in the east, the dawn was breaking. Cock-a-doodle-doo, cock-a-doodle-doo. All the cocks in the little town began suddenly to crow. At that sound, coach, horses, coachman, old goblin man, old goblin woman, and the 3 young goblins gave one last despairing yell and vanished. The girl stood alone at the bathhouse door. Her golden gown and her diamond headdress glistened in the dawn light, and the little mouse crept out of the bathhouse and stood up on its little hind legs and squeaked, Well done, my lovely one, well done. Now take me up in your hand and carry me home with you, and I will find a prince to marry you. So the girl took the little mouse up in her hand and went home. "From the Indies, sir," said the second-hand dealer, pressing his palms together. "Genuine Calamander wood, a rare good buy, sir." "Well, I'll take it," replied Ernest Max somewhat hesitantly. He had been strolling idly through the antique and second-hand shop when the chest caught his attention. It had a rich, exotic look which pleased him. In appearance, the dark brown, black-striped wood resembled ebony, and the chest was quite capacious. It was at least 2 feet wide and 5 feet long, with a depth of nearly 3 feet. When Max learned that the dealer was willing to dispose of it for only $12, he could not resist buying it. What made him hesitate a little was the dealer's initial low price and quite obvious pleasure upon completing the transaction. Was that fine-grained wood only inlay, or did the chest contain some hidden defect? When it was delivered to his room the next day, he could find nothing wrong with it. The Calamander wood was solid and sound, and the entire chest appeared to be in fine condition. The lid clicked smoothly into place when lowered, and the big iron key turned readily enough. Feeling quite satisfied with himself, Max carefully polished the dark wood and then slid the chest into an empty corner of his room. The next time he changed his lodgings, the chest would prove invaluable. Meanwhile, it added just the right exotic touch to his rather drab chamber. Several weeks passed, and although he still cast occasional admiring glances at his new possession, it gradually began to recede from his mind. Then one evening his attention was returned to it in a very startling manner. He was sitting up reading late in the evening when for some reason his eyes lifted from his book, and he looked across the room toward the corner where he had placed the chest. A long white finger protruded from under its lid. He sat motionless, overwhelmed with sudden horror, his eyes riveted on this appalling object. It just hung there, unmoving, a long, pale finger with a heavy knuckle bone and a black nail. After his first shock, Max felt a slow rage kindling within him. The finger had no right to be there. It was unreasonable and idiotic. He resented it bitterly, much as he would have resented the sudden intrusion of an unsavory rumor from down the hall. His peaceful, comfortable evening was ruined by this outrageous manifestation. With an oath, he hurled his book straight at the finger. It disappeared. At least he could no longer see it. Tilting his reading light so that its beam shot across the room, he strode to the chest and flung open the lid. There was nothing inside. Dropping the lid, he picked up his book and returned to the chair. Perhaps he reflected he had been reading too much lately. His eyes, in protest, might be playing tricks on him. For some time longer he pretended to read, but at frequent intervals he lifted his eyes and looked across the room toward the Calamander chest. The finger did not reappear, and eventually he went to bed. A week passed, and he began to forget about the finger. He stayed out more during the evening and read less, and by the end of the week he was quite convinced that he had been the victim of nothing more than an odd hallucination brought on by simple eye strain. At length, at the beginning of the second week, deciding that his eyes had had a good rest, he bought some current magazines and made up his mind to spend the evening in his room. Some time after he took up the first magazine, he glanced over at the chest and saw that all was as it should be. Settling comfortably in his chair, he became absorbed in the magazine and did not put it aside for over an hour. As he finally laid it down and prepared to pick up another, his eyes strayed in the direction of the chest. And there was the finger. It hung there as before, motionless, with its thick knuckle and repulsive black nail. Crowding down an impulse to rush across the room, Max slowly reached over to a small table which stood near his chair and felt for a heavy metal ashtray. As his hand closed on the tray, his eyes never left the finger. Rising very slowly, he began to inch across the room. He was certain that the ashtray, if wielded with force, would effectively crush anything less substantial than itself which it descended on. It was made of solid metal, and it possessed a sharp edge. When he was a scant yard away from the chest, the finger disappeared. When he lifted the lid, the chest, as he had expected, was empty. Feeling considerably shaken, he returned to his chair and sat down. Although the finger did not reappear, he could not drive its hideous image out of his mind. Before going to bed, he reluctantly decided that he would get rid of the chest. He was in sound health, and his eyes had had a week's rest. Therefore, he reasoned, whatever flaw in nature permitted the ugly manifestation rested not with him, but with the chest itself. Looking back, he recalled the second-hand dealer's eagerness to sell the chest at a ridiculously low price. The thing must already have had an evil reputation when the antique dealer acquired it. Knowing it, the unscrupulous merchant had readily consented to part with it for a small sum. Max, a practical young man, admitted the possibility of a non-physical explanation only with reluctance, but felt that he was not in a position to debate the matter. The preservation of stable nerves came first. All other considerations were secondary. Accordingly, on the following day, before leaving for work, he arranged with his landlady to have the chest picked up and carted off to the city dump. He included specific directions that upon arrival it was to be burned. When he arrived back at his room that evening, however, the first thing that met his gaze was the Calamander chest. Furious, he hurried down the hall to his landlady's apartment and demanded an explanation. Why had his orders been ignored? When she was able to get a word in, the patient woman explained that the chest actually had been picked up and carted off to the dump. Upon arrival, however, the man in charge of the dump had assured the men who lugged in the chest that there must have been some mistake. Nobody in his right mind, he asserted, would destroy such a beautiful and expensive article. The men must have picked up the wrong one. Surely there must have been another left behind, he said, which was the worthless one the owner wanted discarded. The two men who had taken the chest to the dump, not feeling secure in their own minds about the matter, and not wishing to make a costly mistake, had returned the chest later in the day. Completely nonplussed by this information, Max muttered an apology to the landlady and went back to his room, where he plopped into a chair and sat staring at the chest. He would, he finally decided, give it one more chance. If nothing further happened, he would keep it. Otherwise, he would take immediate and drastic measures to get rid of it once and for all. Although he had planned to attend a concert that evening, it began to rain shortly after 6 o'clock, and he resigned himself to an evening in his room. Before starting to read, he locked the chest with the iron key and put the key in his pocket. It was absurd that he had not thought of doing so before. This would, he felt, be the decisive test. While he read, he maintained a keen watch on the chest, but nothing happened until well after 11, when he put aside his book for the evening. As he closed the book and started to rise, he looked at the chest, and there was the finger. In appearance, it was unchanged. Instead of hanging slack and motionless, however, it now seemed to be imbued with faint life. It quivered slightly, and it appeared to be making weak attempts to scratch the side of the chest with its long black nail. When he finally summoned up sufficient courage, Max took up the metal ashtray as before and crept across the room. This time he actually had the tray raised to strike before the finger vanished. It seemed to whisk back into the chest. With a wildly thumping heart, Max lifted the lid. Again the box was empty. But then he remembered the iron key in his pocket, and a new thrill of horror coursed down his spine. The hideous digital apparition had unlocked the chest. Either that, or he was rapidly losing his sanity. Completely unnerved, he locked the chest for a second time and then sat in a chair and watched it until 2 o'clock in the morning. At length, exhausted and deeply shaken, he sought his bed. Before putting out the light, he ascertained that the chest was still locked. As soon as he fell asleep, he experienced a hideous nightmare. He dreamed that a persistent scratching sound woke him up, that he arose, lit a candle, and looked at the chest. The protruding finger showed just under the lid, and this time it was galvanized with an excess of life. It twisted and turned, drummed with its thick knuckles, scratched frantically with its flat black nail. At length, as if it suddenly became aware of his presence, it became perfectly still, and then very deliberately beckoned for him to approach. Flooded with horror, he nevertheless found himself unable to disobey. Setting down the candle, he slowly crossed the room like an automaton. The monstrous beckoning finger drew him on like some infernal magnet which attracted human flesh instead of metal. As he reached the chest, the finger darted inside, and the lid immediately lifted. Overwhelmed with terror, and yet utterly unable to stop himself, he stepped into the chest, sat down, drew his knees up to his chin, and turned onto his side. A second later, the lid slammed shut, and he heard the iron key turn in the lock. At this point in the nightmare, he awoke with a ringing scream. He sat up in bed and felt the sweat of fear running down his face. In spite of the nightmare, or because of it, he dared not get up and switch on the light. Instead, he burrowed under the bedclothes and lay wide awake until morning. After he had regained some measure of self-composure, he went out for black coffee and then, instead of reporting to his job, rode across town to the modest home of a truck driver and mover whom he had hired at various times in the past. After some quite detailed and specific plans had been agreed upon, he paid the mover $10 and departed with a promise to pay him an equal amount when the job was done. After lunch, considerably relieved, he went to work. He entered his room that evening with a confident air, but as soon as he looked around, his heart sank. Contrary to instructions, the mover had not picked up the chest. It remained in the corner, just where it had been. This time, Max was more depressed than angry. He sought out a telephone and called up the mover. The man was profusely apologetic. His truck had broken down, he explained, just as he was starting out to pick up the chest. The repairs were nearly completed, however, and he would absolutely be out to carry off the chest the first thing in the morning. Since there was nothing else he could do, Max thanked him and hung up. Finding himself unusually reluctant to return to his room, he ate a leisurely dinner at a nearby restaurant and later attended a movie. After the movie, he stopped and had a hot chocolate. It was nearly midnight before he got back to his room. In spite of his nightmare of the previous evening, he found himself looking forward to bed. He had lost almost an entire night's sleep, and he was beginning to feel the strain. After assuring himself that the Calamander chest was securely locked, he slipped the iron key under his pillow and got into bed. In spite of his uneasiness, he soon fell asleep. Some hours later, he awoke suddenly and sat up. His heart was pounding. For a moment, he was not aware of what had awakened him. Then he heard it. A furious scratching, tapping, thumping sound came from one corner of the room. Trembling violently, he got out of bed, crossed the room, and pressed the button on his reading lamp. Nothing happened. Either the electricity was shut off, or the light bulb had burned out. He pulled open a drawer of the lampstand and frantically searched for a candle. By the time he found one and applied a match to its wick, the scratching sound had redoubled in intensity. The entire room seemed filled with it. Shuddering, he lifted the candle and started across the room toward the Calamander chest. As the wavering light of the candle flickered into the far corner, he saw the finger. It protruded far out of the chest, and it was writhing with furious life. It thrummed and twisted, dug at the chest with its horrible black nail, tapped and turned in an absolute frenzy of movement. Suddenly, as he advanced, it became absolutely still. It hung down limp. Engulfed with terror, Max was convinced that it had become aware of his approach and was now watching him. When he was halfway across the room, the finger slowly lifted and deliberately beckoned to him. With a rush of renewed horror, Max remembered the ghastly events of his dream. Yet, as in the nightmare, he found himself utterly unable to disobey that diabolical summons. He went on like a man in a trance. Early the next morning, the mover and his assistant were let into Max's room by the landlady. Max had apparently already left for work, but there was no need of his presence, since he had already given the mover detailed instructions in regard to the disposal of the chest. The chest, locked but without a key, stood in one corner of the room. The melted wax remains of a candle, burned to the end of its wick, lay nearby. The landlady shook her head. "A good way to burn the house down," she complained. "I'll have to speak to Mr. Max. Not like him to be so careless." The movers, burdened with the chest, paid no attention to her. The assistant growled as they started down the stairs. "Must be lined with lead. Never knew a chest so heavy before." "Heavy wood," his companion commented shortly, not wishing to waste his breath. "Wonder why he's dumping such a good chest?" the assistant asked later as the truck approached an abandoned quarry near the edge of town. The chief mover glanced at him slyly. "I guess I know," he said. "He bought it of Jason Kinkle, and Kinkle never told him the story on it. But he found out later, I figure, and that's why he's ditching it." The assistant's interest picked up. "What's the story?" he asked. They drove into the quarry grounds and got out of the truck. "Kinkle bought it dirt cheap at an auction," the mover explained as they lifted out the chest. "Auction of old Henry Stubberton's furniture." The assistant's eyes widened as they started up a steep slope with the chest. "You mean the Stubberton they found murdered in a chest?" the mover finished for him. "This chest." Neither spoke again until they set down the chest at the edge of a steep quarry shaft. Glancing down at the deep water which filled the bottom of the shaft, the mover wiped the sweat from his face. "A pretty sight," they say he was, "all doubled up and turning black. Seems he wasn't dead when they shut him in, though. They say he must have tried to claw his way out. When they opened the chest, they found one of his fingers jammed up under the lid near the lock. Tried to pick the lock with his fingernail, it looked like." The assistant shuddered. "Let's be rid of it, then. It's bad luck, sure." The mover nodded. "Take hold and shove." They strained together, and in another second the Calamander chest slipped over the edge of the quarry and hurtled toward the pool of black water far below. There was one terrific splash, and then it sank from sight like a stone. "That's good riddance, and another tenner for me," the mover commented. Oddly enough, however, he never collected the tenner, for after that day, Mr. Ernest Max dropped completely out of sight. He was never seen or heard of again. The disgruntled mover, never on the best of terms with the police, shrugged off the loss of the tenner and neglected to report the disposal of the chest. And since the landlady had never learned the mover's name, nor where he intended taking the chest, her sparse information was no help in the search. The police concluded that Max had got into some scrape, changed his name, and effected a permanent change of locale.